welcome to Pulse by AlphaWire, the podcast where science and education meet cutting-edge technology and artificial intelligence. My name is Aldo de Pape, and each week I sit down with innovators, thinkers and doers who are working to change our world for the better. Together we explore their journeys, uncover the lessons they've learned, and take the entrepreneurial pulse that drives them on their path to success. It was a great honor to speak to Patrick Joyce and Koury from ResearchHub, a company that is very quickly disrupting the world of scientific publishing, using cutting-edge decentralized technology to genuinely democratize the way we work with vital scientific information. We speak about the strides this company is making and what it is like to build a company together with Brian Armstrong, co-founder and CEO of Coinbase. Dr. Koury is the president at the ResearchHub Foundation and has an extensive background in biomedical sciences. Patrick Joyce is co-founder and COO of ResearchHub, and I absolutely loved his lived version of events of giving life to ResearchHub. Sincerely hope you will enjoy my conversation with the both of them. Yes, and we are live here with a new episode, and this one, it's actually an excuse to do a podcast because it's always nice to hang out with these guys. And a very warm welcome to the both of you, Patrick Joyce and Koury from ResearchHub and the ResearchHub Foundation. How are you guys today?
Good to see you, Aldo.
Yeah, doing good, Aldo. Thank you.
As I said before, it's a Friday afternoon for me, 4 p.m., almost happy hour. The weekend is about to start, but it's 8 a.m. for you guys. So much appreciated. You're good and ready to do an interview at 8 a.m. Are you both in the same location at this moment? Are you in the same city or whereabouts are you?
So I live in Lake Tahoe, so maybe like 3 hours outside of the Bay Area, and then Jeff's in the South Bay.
Okay. And how, for someone who's in Scotland, so far away, how far is that from each other?
I can tell you I drove it a couple weekends ago. So yeah, about 4.5 hours.
Yeah, nice. So, I want to talk about DeSci, because we got to know each other at these lovely DeSci conferences that we both attended every so often, Decentralized Science, and more specifically, of course, the solution that ResearchHub and the ResearchHub Foundation is actually offering in this world that we call DeSci. And then also, of course, I wanted to say that you are on the forefront of this entire narrative as ResearchHub. So you're doing amazing work there. And if I go to your website, which is a beautiful website, I see the first thing I see is it's a new economic model for science. And so my question would be, why does science need a new economic model? That would be my first question.
Yeah, so I think maybe looking at the symptoms is the best way to sort of indicate that we need to have some change. So I'm not sure if your audience is familiar, but there's this concept of the replication crisis in science. Over the last 2 decades, there have been a lot of meta-scientists who have gone in to audit scientific literature from all kinds of fields, psychology, cancer research, physics. And it turns out that in general, about 50 to 85% of all experiments are unable to be independently replicated. This is a huge problem. This means that only 15 to 50% of the science being produced today is trustworthy and able to be built upon due to basically irreproducibility. So yeah, that to me seems like a huge problem that probably wastes a lot of money. If you look at the amyloid beta hypothesis for Alzheimer's, it's a clear example of how some of the incentives in science can lead to irreproducibility. And then behind that comes a lot of investment and just wasted money. So yeah, I think there's lots of examples of sort of the cracks showing in the economy of science. And, I met Jeff because he actually had a very similar idea to ResearchHub independently. And a lot of the folks on our team did. So I think what we're trying to build is not exactly like the most unique idea in the world. It's sort of like a common solution that has been sort of thought up by a bunch of different people all over the world at a similar time. And we've been very lucky to sort of aggregate around ResearchHub. So I think people who are paying attention are noticing that there are a lot of issues in the way that academic science currently works. And, there are a lot of awesome people who are spending their time and energy trying to fix it.
That's a great answer. What I want to get to the waste end later on, because I think that's very interesting what you're saying. And that's more like a macroeconomic perspective of like how much money are we wasting here because we're doing it wrongly. The other end to that is that the personal story, right? So Jeff, if you could maybe enlighten us, like what was your personal frustration that made you want to change this, like your own journey into this?
Yeah, absolutely. So I was, traditional academic background. So I was doing my PhD, biomedical sciences, focus on neuroimmunology. And, when you're an undergrad and you're in the early stages of science, you don't come across some of the issues. Like you're sort of insulated from these issues because they're what your PI has to deal with or your supervisor. But once you start moving your way up, you sort of have to confront the reality of how do you, as a scientist, acquire funding, and how do you, as a scientist, publish your information out into manuscripts. And these publications are sort of like your currency. You touched on the economy of science. Like, well, the economy of science is, as a scientist, is what can I publish and how many citations do I get from those publications?
Yeah.
So you start getting ingrained in that. So I started to get ingrained in that during my PhD program. And it was very enlightening in the wrong way. Right? So like I came across how difficult it was. It took 2 to 3 months for me to write an NIH application. I'm a junior scientist, so 2 to 3 months just to produce this like 60 to 70 page document, to go submit it, to go get funding. And then the funding takes about 6 months for you to hear from a group of people behind closed doors ranking your application. Then once it's ranked, to simply get money sent over to your university was like another month or two process. And it was just a whole 9 to 10 months to even receive any funding. And it took away so much time from what I wanted to do, which was the actual science and like the discovery to help push like a therapy through. So I thought that in an age where I think all of us have grown up in, it's so easy to transfer finances and money, and it shouldn't be that hard to like be able to get that. So that was where a good chunk of my frustration had come from, as well as the publication process was quite frustrating, knowing that my whole manuscript or publications were bottlenecked simply because a journal couldn't find peer reviewers, because peer reviewers aren't paid and there's no incentive given to them. And so I thought the incentive model for science was completely out of whack. And I was lucky enough to come across Pat and the rest of the Research Hub team while I was going through those frustrations. And I've been around now for about 4 years, working with the Research Hub Foundation to help fix those incentives.
And so for you as a junior researcher, as you said, your drive was, I need to get published, because getting published is what gets me career progress, right? So your focus isn't necessarily on the money that you will receive for yourself, but more to get your research going, right? It's not for you to get a salary or maybe just a bit of money, but it's more like you want the money because you want to kind of get your project on the move so you can publish about it. And then if you publish, you'll get promoted or people will find out about you, right? That's the kind of drive that you have. It's not like, okay, give me your money so I can buy a new car.
Totally.
Yeah.
And this economy is extremely competitive. And when you're thinking from the perspective of a more senior scientist, it's not even just like money for yourself and for your own research. You normally have trainees who are sort of dependent on you. So you have like, a bunch of people who care about their career that like need you to publish, get a lot of citations, so that way you can get grants in the future. When I was a PhD student, I was rotating through a synthetic biology lab. It was amazing. It was like Frankenstein science. Really enjoyed it. It was with a new PI who had just finished a postdoc at UC Berkeley, had multiple Nature papers when he was at UC Berkeley. When he got to BU, I was rotating through his lab after his first year, and he was just like walking on eggshells constantly because he had moved his whole family to Boston. He had a bunch of trainees. He was applying for an R01. And basically, if he didn't get this R01, then he was going to have to basically leave the university, like pack up his family and move to a new school, kind of relocate his entire life, which was crazy to me that there was any stress around this person's life because they had about as much success as humanly possible at that point in their career. So I remember rotating through this lab, seeing this brilliant person who worked like all the time, who had like a dream level of success, who still constantly had stress around funding. And if for whatever reason the funding didn't work out, there were like very significant consequences in their life. So then I remember just thinking that it was like, you look at some of the issues around like p hacking and hypothesizing after results are known, some of these techniques that scientists will adopt in order to make their results look a little bit more compelling and more likely to be published in high prestige journals. It's actually like extremely a relatable behavior because when you have that much at stake around funding and the market is so competitive, you kind of have to do like whatever you can in order to get the next grant. So that way, like the people dependent on you are able to do their jobs and live their lives. So it's a problematic situation in my mind where the folks who are at like the absolute tops of their field still feel this financial pressure where they might have to change their behaviors in order to like receive more funding in the future. So I think it's pretty clear something needs to change.
That reminds me of the story of this lady who won the Nobel Prize for Chemistry for the mRNA vaccine. And she said, you wouldn't believe, just a few years ago, nobody wanted me. I didn't have a job. I was about to give up. And now I've got the Nobel Prize. But she was trying to shine a light on how bad the situation is for so many researchers, also on the, cream of the crop, like, everything that we consider to be like Ivy League and all the accolades is still so badly financed and so many insecurities that create so much stress for these people, and as a consequence, of course, they won't do their work properly, right? They undoubtedly have its effects on the outcome of their research if they're continuously stressed for financial resources.
I think this gets to the core of the problem too, because like there's a similar story around the discovery of CRISPR, where the person who first discovered the enzyme responsible for CRISPR, they couldn't get their paper published for multiple years. So like they're submitting it to journals. Journals are like, this isn't that exciting, whatever. And then 4 or 5 years later, they win a Nobel Prize. So yeah, I think the core issue in science is that in the moment, it's very difficult to sort of assess the quality of any given research output or any given scientist. So, yeah, like somebody can publish the discovery of CRISPR, something that's revolutionized biotechnology, and it takes like 5 years for the world to really figure it out.
Yeah.
So, if you're that scientist, you publish that paper, you're 3 years deep. Funders look at your career history and they're not that impressed, but then 3 years later, you win a Nobel Prize and you can get all the funding you need. So it's a difficult problem that funders have, in our opinion, is assessing the quality of any given research output or researcher. And that's sort of like the main issue where a lot of the other problems sort of fall out of.
Yeah. So takeaway of this story is we should all win a Nobel Prize. But
we're working on it.
We're working on it. But before that point, Patrick, you started a company to do something about it. So tell me a little bit about the journey.
Yeah, totally. So I mentioned I started a PhD. It was in molecular biology, biochemistry. I mentioned a story about my PI. That was the first time when I kind of, picked my head up out of the sand and was like, okay, this isn't just, what I like to do as a profession. There's sort of, a marketplace around it and there's dynamics there. And like, is there a future, in what I like to do professionally? And I saw that with my PI where he had tremendous stress despite like his career success. And to me, it made me start to question sort of like a career in academic science. One other story that was very eye-opening for me, I was in a cancer biology lab, and in this lab was maybe like 10 people. It was one of the bigger labs at my university. There was a 9th-year PhD. Typically, PhDs in molecular biology are like 5 to 7 years. So this was significantly longer. This person had run out of funding, but they didn't have the publications that they needed to graduate. So what they were doing was waiting tables kind of on nights and weekends, sleeping on a friend's couch, and using the money that they made from their side job in order to pay for reagents and experiments in order to get the results they needed in order to publish in a journal, in order to satisfy an arbitrary sort of bar set by a committee. So that way he could then get a postdoc and get paid $45,000 a year. And I saw that and was just like, oh man, like this was a smart person. I like hung out with them. They seemed smart, hardworking. Just, things didn't like kind of fall their way throughout their like, graduate school career. The end result is like there's unbelievable financial pressure on them, to get a result to then get like a, I think a good job, but not one that pays extremely well. And so, yeah, it just, I I saw that, was learning about the replication crisis, and it just became so apparent to me that it's not even this person's fault if they were to sort of like make their results look better than they actually are. Like this is just a person who's trying to move on with their life,
Yeah.
So I don't know. It
Yeah, they're
humanized
just
the
trying to get out of it, right? They're just trying to kind of bring the situation to an end, but they're stuck, as you say, ninth year PhD. You just want to bring it to an end, right? Yeah.
I might remove some outliers from my data if I was in his situation,
Yeah.
in order to get a publication. So that seemed like something was broken to me. So
Yeah.
I ended up dropping out with a master's, started medical school, was interested in psychiatry. I was very lucky the medical school that I went to got you into the clinic like almost immediately. So, I got to see patients right away. And then like very quickly found that sort of the leading medications in psychiatry, it's very disappointing how effective they are. They work well. Like we use the same drugs to treat PTSD, OCD, anxiety, depression. They work well in some subpopulations of patients, but like barely better than a placebo across all populations of patients. And so I was just thinking like, man, why don't these drugs work better? And the exciting new developments that were in the pipeline at that point were things like psychedelics, MDMA, mindfulness meditation, cannabis. It was almost like the innovation was not the result of bioengineering based on like a superior understanding of neuroscience. It was more like regulatory open-mindedness that was allowing like compounds that the world has known has had some kind of like therapeutic potential for thousands of years. So to me, this was like, what is going on? Like, where are the drugs that are going to help to fix some of the most common problems that exist in the world today? They weren't there. So my mind started to think about why this happens, reflected on some of the stories that I saw of like sort of financial pressures influencing the quality of science, and sort of realized that the way that we distribute capital as funders of science creates these like really bad incentives that just like reduces the quality of the results as a whole and ends up wasting a lot of money and time and energy. And that's sort of the reason why we don't have like better clinical options, at the end of the pipeline to help to solve real world problems for people. So wanted to work on something to make a difference. So I took a year off of med school, tried to make a Reddit for science type of company. And yeah, it's just slowly grown from there. So it's been a blast. I've gotten to meet a bunch of great people like you, Aldo and Jeff. And so yeah, just the community working on this problem, they're the most inspiring humans. So I feel very lucky to have made that decision.
Nice. Let's go now into the decentralized bit, because this is also kind of a very interesting little niche that we've carved out, because we're talking science and how science should change. So which element of decentralized, so where is decentralized making the difference for you guys? What's your version of events when it comes to decentralized?
The way that I like to think about this is through the lens of a project called SciHub. Although you're familiar with SciHub, right?
Yes, yeah.
So in scientific publishing, there's this huge problem where the dominant business model for a really long time was paywalls. So like if I'm a scientist, I need to pay to access a Nature paper in order to read from it and then use it in my own work. This is a huge problem because if you don't like belong to a tier 1 university, typically you don't have access to all of these scientific papers. So when I was an undergrad, I did undergraduate research at Johns Hopkins, one of the best universities in the United States. It was amazing. You get a Johns Hopkins login, you get every single scientific paper that exists.
Yeah.
During the school year, unfortunately, I went to a small liberal arts undergrad called Elon University in North Carolina. Once I started doing research at Elon during the school year, I maybe had access to like 2/3 of scientific papers because Elon's a small school. They're not going to spend money on subscriptions.
Yeah.
If you like, and we're still in the US, so it's still like a pretty wealthy university. There are lots of universities out there that have even less access. And if you don't go to a university, you have almost no access and need to pay $30, a paper in order to like actually read scientific literature. So SciHub was a project that was developed by a neuroscientist in Kazakhstan, where the idea was to use technology to sort of like illegally circumvent this problem. Essentially, anyone could upload a scientific paper to this sort of server, and then anyone could then download that scientific paper. So it was sort of like this like P2P Napster style exchange of scientific literature. So this was very inspiring to me because I was like, oh, this is cool. Like sort of a pirate out here, like trying to like free the knowledge, and so that to
Robin
me
Hood,
seemed
yeah.
very compelling. Yeah, but the story of Sci-Hub and how they got sued, right? And so essentially what happened maybe like 2 or 3 years ago is like these big publishers who have this business model around paywalls. They're obviously pretty upset that this is happening. There were schools like the University of California system actually like stopped their subscriptions to some of these paywall journals in part because of the leverage that Sci-Hub gave them, where their scientists didn't really need the subscriptions because they could just go to Sci-Hub, worst case scenario. So these journals got upset. They're big, billion-dollar companies. They sue the person who made Sci-Hub, and cops show up at her door. She has to go to court. She's court ordered to no longer upload new papers. So Sci-Hub, maybe 2 or 3 years ago, was stymied, unable to continue its mission due to a legal system. So one of the most compelling parts about decentralization to me personally is you can create tools where like it's really, really hard to stop them. So like you look at Bitcoin, for example, like if you're a state actor and you want to sue Bitcoin or you want to shut down Bitcoin, right, how do you even go about that? I know like there have been nation states who have tried to do that in the past unsuccessfully. So it's an extremely resilient system where you can create a network that provides value to folks in a way that's I don't love this term, but it's like very anti-fragile. It's very hard to shut down. So you can look at the use case of Sci-Hub, which was providing tremendous value to the world. And if it had been architected in a decentralized way, it would be still around, providing value today in a much more resilient fashion. So at ResearchHub, we don't want to do anything illegal, 100%. We want to follow all laws and regulations. But we do believe that decentralization as an infrastructure can create longevity and a lot of value and resilience in a few different ways. So I think Sci-Hub's a great example of like how a decentralized peer-to-peer sharing platform, can bring a lot of value and like is more likely to succeed over the long term if it's also architected in a decentralized fashion.
Yeah, I want to also add kind of this concept of decentralization as it pertains to maybe peer review and like funding. So right now a lot of like funding is intermediated through larger like organizations like the NIH, the NSF, some nonprofits that also move quite a bit of money, and there's sort of these like chunks or groups of people that do that. Similarly with publishing, has these like groups or oligopolies of publishers that sort of own most of the journals. You can think of it like Coke and Pepsi owning a bunch of different things. But one thing that I think the decentralization part kicks in here, and I'm speaking through the lens of ResearchHub, is we start having this like ability for, rather than people wanting to like submit through these journals and have to go through these like publishers where you can publish, just things become a little bit more individualistic, where you're publishing like a preprint or a paper and it's just going up on a server. It's not going through this like giant entity. And then you have reviewers who are coming in and like globally coming in with an incentive on top to like peer review that work. And so there's like this system that's built up that's completely like adjacent to this set of like centralized actors, where it's like more like an individualistic kind of basis rather than this like part of a big entity. So a reviewer can build up a reputation for themselves as a good quality reviewer, and rather than as an author saying like, oh, I'm excited to go publish in Nature, maybe I'm more excited to get my paper up on ResearchHub, get a good review from a good quality person, and get hundreds of upvotes, right? So then that sort of like pulls things away from this centralized nature of how things are conventionally done. And in a similar fashion with funding, right? Like, I don't have to go to the NIH for the NIH to give me this slow turning 9-month, thing to give me and distribute money, and the pay line is crazy. There's actually like a way to peer do it, where a funder who could be a high net worth individual, could be just a normal person who has some money, can work together to crowdfund for specific projects. So it's sort of taking this opportunity to, have an adjacent system to what the centralized kind of counterparty is.
And I think also as an additional benefit, I think you also democratize the message a little bit more, because it's kind of like if you need to wait for it to be published or whatever, you can already talk about the research that you're doing and the fact that you're looking for funding, and bring it already to a bigger crowd of people rather than just having to knock on the door of the NIH, right? You're knocking on many doors because you do it on this platform where all people come together, right? So you bring that together. My question would be are you also looking into hybrid models? So for instance, where the NIH is a part of funding already and then you guys come in as well, is that something that you're looking at, or is it either or?
It's basically a long-term process, I would say. We're still in an early version of our product at ResearchHub. I don't think we've found product market fit yet. We're still experimenting. We do have some signs of life, though. We had $1 million committed to be run through our funding feature from a nonprofit called DMT Quest that's supporting human consciousness research. For instance, we had a project around like a fMRI results of people doing Wim Hof breathing. So some pretty cool stuff, but building a tech product is hard. Like there's bugs, lots of iterations. So I think we're not ready for the prime time yet, but hopefully we'll be in a couple of years.
Yeah, and I mean, you need to start somewhere, because I do see from your website that the researchers that you're working with are from all universities, including the top tier ones. So, as Jeff says, also global, right? So, but it's a healthy mix of researchers from all over the world, literally, right? So, I appreciate that. Jeff, what does the Research Hub Foundation do, and where is it different from Research Hub, the company?
Yeah, so the ResearchHub Foundation, as we talked about early in the podcast, incentives are important. And I think one of the big things, there was an open science movement that was happening before the decentralized science movement. And I think it was an amazing movement. The intentions of it were perfect, open access and open source, a lot of the content of science. I think the big problem with that was there wasn't quite the incentive layer on top of that to give people the incentive to do it. I think of it like electric vehicles, like, there was an early movement for electric vehicles where it was like, hey, let's do this. It's good for the environment. But all of the infrastructure and like the performance of the vehicles was really poor, and, all this stuff. And it never took off. And so then there was sort of a resurgence of that when good quality products came out that had that incentive of these cars perform really well. They have really cool tech in there. And by the way, it helps the environment because they're electric. So I think that like DeSci and incentives are like that, where the open source or an open science model is sort of like the doing good for the environment, but then we need those like good platforms, those good incentives on top to like actually make people want to do it. And so, for the foundation, we kind of issued a cryptocurrency, research coin, that actually is used, and permeated throughout ResearchHub, the platform, to be able to push those incentives to help people behave in an open science manner. So that's kind of one of the big things for the foundation. So we kind of manage and deal with a lot of that, as well as we sort of house the community for ResearchHub. And so what that entails is all different types of contributors who are coming in and pushing, various different initiatives. So for example, we have a ton of contributors who we call editors, who range anywhere from postdocs all the way up to tenured professors. And these editors are in charge of helping sort of source and curate the peer reviews on ResearchHub. And so we're able to incentivize peer reviews on the platform using the platform's bounty feature. And then we have, I think we're at 13, 14, or 15 or so editors. We're still growing the team, so if anyone's interested, but editors who are here to, put bounties out, have peer reviewers come in, quality control the peer reviews that are coming in, and distribute that incentive to peer reviewers for the work that they do. So a combination of, handling the incentive model and the cryptocurrency, as well as working with all various types of community members and contributors.
To add to that too, just like to go into some of the thought process, Goodhart's law is a concept that's very important to what we're trying to build at ResearchHub. The idea here is explained through when a measure becomes a target, it ceases to be a good measure. Basically, this happens all the time in economics. Like if you evaluate someone's performance using one or two different metrics, folks start to optimize to fulfill those metrics rather than a holistic improved performance. Like they talk about countries doing this with GDP all the time. So this happens in science. Essentially, like folks are optimizing for the measure of citations rather than trying to just produce high quality research. And so at ResearchHub, like we're trying to reward people for doing high quality science. Like we are also impacted by Goodhart's law. we've seen already on the platform that like folks' behavior will change depending on how we're allocating research coin for certain behaviors. So we're like hyper aware of the fact that creating incentives can like hopefully work out well, but in practice, like there are all kinds of different variables that you can't account for, and you never know how behavior is actually going to shake out. So we're also very conscious of the fact that like our team for ResearchHub Incorporated, we're about 5 people. We only have one PhD in the team. Like I did a couple of years of a PhD program, a couple of years of med school, never graduated. We have a bunch of engineers. Brian did a master's in computer science, but he's not like a tenured professor. And so we wanted to build the Research Hub Foundation in order to give scientists the ability to have control over how their outputs are judged and rewarded. So the Research Hub Foundation has control over Research Coin. They have control over how incentives are set on the platform. Yeah, basically, like, we're lazy and we wanted to outsource the incentive structure to people who are a lot smarter than us. So, we've gotten folks like Jeff, like there are a ton of brilliant scientists in the Research Hub Foundation who basically like tell us how to set the incentives on the platform. And they're in charge of a continual iteration around setting incentives that actually help to encourage behavior that results in higher quality science.
Yeah. And do you see the paradigm shifting there? Like, what was an incentive maybe when you started isn't an incentive anymore? Because, when you brought a new infrastructure to these people, then they're excited and they might be incentivized by little things. And now maybe someone who's getting into the game wants to do something else. Do you see any changes there already? I appreciate it's early days, but any changes that you've seen?
100%.
Yeah, early on, we were sort of hyper incentivizing this concept of upvotes. So, if we wanted to, incentivize discussion and discourse happening publicly on through like scientific content. So we had, a lot of incentives going towards upvotes. As you can imagine, people will post all kinds of things and go through all kinds of like hoops to be able to get as many upvotes as possible. So we realized, wow, this is producing fairly low quality content and commentary on the platform. And so through a governance vote, voted to distribute allocation or emissions towards things like peer review, things towards like funding, and really disincentivize this concept of upvotes receiving any awards. And the result of that has been tremendous. We have a ton of high quality scientists coming in, providing good quality reviews. We see this number kicking up and to the right. And we have a lot of people coming in submitting applications for funding, peer reviewing the funding proposals. And so the behavior of these users has changed completely simply because of a change in the distribution of an incentive. And so it's been sort of night and day between the two kind of moments.
I want to kind of take you further into the DeSci world and have you talk about when you look at other solutions out there. And kind of, because our version is there's DeSci for DeSci with an actual use case, and then there's DeSci whereby, okay, I don't know, you don't necessarily know where it's going to go. So if I look at DeSci, I kind of always want to see the product and the use case and really what's the value add for scientists here today, right now. What's your version of this? Because you work with so many researchers. I appreciate that those who are working with ResearchHub are no longer skeptics, but what's your take on DeSci outside of ResearchHub?
So I think we're still in the very early days. I kind of mentioned like we don't consider ourselves to have product market fit yet. We're generating like solid revenue, but we're not at break even. I don't know if any project has product market fit yet in the decentralized science ecosystem. I think bio is pretty far along. I think what they're doing, experimenting with IP NFTs, is a really cool concept. And like if executed properly, could be extremely impactful, like involving patients, the average person in the scientific process in a way where they can essentially like receive a return on their time and energy investments, I think is extremely compelling. You can look at like rare diseases, where like there aren't that many researchers kind of studying things, and individuals will often like kind of dive in because they have a family member, who has something. So yeah, I think there's helping to monetize that, I think could be extremely powerful and create incentives for more people to get involved. A project like Pump.Science, for instance, I think is like like a really cool experiment, basically like trying to make science more fun, for the average person to get involved. So yeah, I think we're in the very early stages of this. And like, I love the crypto ecosystem in general because there are a lot of really creative people trying new things. And like, one thing I've learned about creating a company is like the things at the beginning of the journey that you think would work in your mind never ever ever do. It's more about just like taking that first step and then like seeing what kind of works and doubling down on it and then iterating over a long period of time. So yeah, I think it's really cool how there are many different perspectives, many different ideas of how to create projects that can bring value to science, some of which sound kind of weird, from the first like level. But I think basically, it's a marketplace and an economy, and the more shots on goal we have as an industry, like the more likely something will be able to iterate over time and create value and then grow to actually make an impact. So yeah, I think it's extremely creative, and the folks that I've met in the industry so far, like yourself, Aldo, are like really cool people trying to fix problems. So yeah, in general, it's an inspiring community to be a part of, I think, and early stage with lots of experimentation.
No, I agree, 100%. The kind of bit that I always, where I emphasize caution is make sure that the science stays your focus, right? That's what you want to do, because the fundraising elements or the crypto raise or all the money coming in can be tempting to just go for that. But you need to kind of close the loop, bringing it back to science. That's the most important part. And so you need to show that impact, which is why I like ResearchHub so much, because there's a direct cycle, right? There's a direct kind of model that is in place because it is based on a flawed model in the real world, right? So that's essentially, we're trying to do that in our way as well. And that's always what I advise people to do, is like make sure that it is an improvement of what science is today. Don't try to recreate what is science in a decentralized world. Then you haven't done anything. You've just brought something to a different kind of world, but not improved anything. And then I don't feel that that's going to be sustainable. I don't think that's going to be good for the industry in the long run. But it's a difficult path, and I agree with you. People are very creative, very energetic. They do great stuff, right? So yeah, 100%.
So just to double down on that, like there's this concept of token gating in Web3, where the idea is like if you hold a certain number of a project's tokens, you can get into their Discord, get some access to something, because you hold a certain amount of some digital asset. So we've had some folks come up to us and suggest that, hey, maybe content on ResearchHub should be token gated, and it's very funny because that's a model that does work, has been proven to work. You can get 40% profit margins on that model, but that would exacerbate the problems that Jeff and I experienced, within academia. So when people come up to us to say that, they're normally coming from a business perspective, not a science perspective. And it's pretty easy to tell, like, once you talk to somebody for 5 minutes, like whether they're actually interested in the science or the business side of things. And what we want to do is, create a business that helps to serve science. So that's why we're excited around a business model around funding. I think corporate incentives play a huge role. That's part of the problem with the, scientific publishing industry, in its current iteration. So a business model around funding, I think, is very interesting because as a company, our corporate incentives would be to bring more money to scientists, and we can optimize our revenue by helping scientists get more resources to do what they're passionate about. So to me, that feels like a very incentive aligned structure where if our company is successful, we actually bring value to scientists instead of extracting it over time. So yeah, very excited about that.
Nice. Yeah. It's a more recent endeavor, if I understand it, getting funders in, but also helping the people who need the funding and basically work on both ends to bring them together in a very quick, decentralized way, making it very transparent. I'm sure letting the researchers speak for themselves. Jeff, as you said, like the peer reviewers, that they are, people of their own, not necessarily their institution. They bring that along, but that making direct connections between the two is, of course, that's a great way to go. And hopefully you'll be successful in that specific part. Patrick, I would be amiss if I wouldn't mention, and I know you get that as a question a lot, but if I wouldn't mention your famous co-founder, And I recall once we spoke about him earlier. So that's Brian Armstrong, of course, the CEO and founder of Coinbase as well. You said he's one of the most hardworking people you know.
Yeah, Brian is like an inspiration daily. He seriously cares about problems in the world, and I I've met a lot of people in my life. I've never met anybody who consistently works as hard as he does towards like trying to fix problems. Just for an example, the first time that I met him, he had written this blog essentially around like the incentives in science and like why everything's broken and how to fix it. And it was very similar to sort of my perspective as a PhD student, a medical student, around the problems and like what a potential solution could be. And so when I first met him, I was like, why are you thinking about this? Like, don't you have like a like a public company to run or something? Like why in your free time are you trying to solve problems and not like go to the beach and have fun? And so he told me that like he was on a family vacation. He takes a family vacation with his family every year for a week. And his sister is a biology PhD, and they're just hanging out on a vacation. She's talking about the problems. And he's like, whoa, this is insane. It makes no sense whatsoever. And he couldn't stop thinking about it. And on his vacation, he did all that research and wrote that blog. And so, I think Brian derives a lot of fulfillment from moving the world forward, and it's been such an amazing learning experience being able to work with him on ResearchHub, how to build a team, how to set culture, how to do things that matter, focus on the things that actually provide value, like product-led growth, essentially. It's been amazing. So an extremely lucky scenario. And again, just doubling down on where like the more that I spend time with him, the more that like I feel like I need to become a better person. So yeah, it's a very lucky scenario.
He leads by example.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So what I like about Brian, even though I've of course never met him, but I heard an interview with him, and then I heard that his first venture was something in education, as was mine, like helping teachers and stuff like that.
University Tutor. I used it when I was a grad student. University's Tutor was the name of the company. It helped to connect tutors with people who, in theory, like needed tutoring. And it was funny because like when I was a PhD student, when I first started to think of like a company helping scientists earn money for creating high value content, it was because I was getting paid 30 grand in Boston. I had like no money whatsoever. I couldn't, like take my girlfriend out to dinner at the time. So I was tutoring in order to get like $50 an hour here and there to just live life. So I literally used University Tutor in order to gain money as a grad student, because what I really wanted was, to get paid $150 for peer review, but that didn't exist. So yeah, hilarious.
Nice. Yeah. So I heard his struggles, and it made me very much think of my struggles, because I was trying to do something nothing with tutoring, but more helping teachers. And I thought, like, someone who thinks like that does it really to make a difference, right? It didn't sound like this was, all about the profits. It was more about how can we make this world a better place. I know that sounds very kumbaya, but that's in essence, it's like, why would you bother looking at that in the first place? At those things. So
I think it's creating value, right? Like creating value in the world, and there are big, hairy problems that are tough to solve that, if solved, will create a ton of value. And I think, there's a theme in the companies that he's creating, that's pretty much along those lines.
Nice. Yeah. Wonderful. Before I get to my kind of very last question, I kind of want to know, and I know this is a bit cheesy, but I always ask, I guess, it's like, what are you most proud of? Like, so you're now looking back, when did the ResearchHub journey start?
I first started working on this in like 2017-ish. So yeah, ResearchHub was founded in 2019. So we've been at it for, like 5-6 years, something like that.
Yeah. Genomes in 2018. But so if you now kind of look back, what's the one thing, I wake you up in the middle of the night, Patrick, what are you most proud of? And Jeff, I'll get to you in a second.
It's weird because like when you ask that, I go to a not professional context, like my personal relationships, you know what I mean? Like my friends and family, basically. But if Jeff, could you go first?
Sharon is sharing on this podcast. Throw it
in. Everyone's an open book here, huh?
Everyone's an open book. No secret.
Yeah, I think for me, it was more of like maybe like an internal kind of operational thing at the foundation. The foundation really truly came up from like a grounds up kind of scenario. So it was very much like a very decentralized group of people who came in that were really passionate about being involved in just the mission that was behind ResearchHub. And you start off in this like people are like kind of floundering. It's like everyone wants to get involved, but there's no clear like structure because it's just so decentralized and flat. And I think just being able to go from that situation to like a much more cohesive, structured, organized group that has like clear things that are being tackled and like coming out with like clear clear W's, clear wins. Like our peer reviews are really hitting like all-time highs over the last couple of weeks. And so I think just coming from a place where it was just this amorphous group of people who had the energy and passion, but then redirecting that passion into like a consolidated formed thing was quite difficult actually. And I look back and think those were kind of like the wild west fun times, and it's still fun now, but it's a lot more structured, organized, and very like output oriented. So I would say those things from our side.
So I have an answer now too, and this is maybe like a cop-out answer, so take it for what it's worth. But so a concept that Brian taught me was Paul Graham, like the founder of Y Combinator, has this concept of default alive and default dead. So like default alive is you're making more revenue than you're spending. Default dead is, you're not making more revenue than you're spending every month. So you're like existing on investor cash, essentially. So we're still default dead. And that makes me like, my gut feeling when you asked that question was basically like, we don't have anything to be proud of yet, and we need to keep working and like get to something to be proud of, so that's like my first reaction, is that like we haven't made a big enough difference yet to really reflect in that sort of way. And then like thinking, if I were to think of like what am I most proud of currently in the project, is like the collection of humans that we have around it. Like it's just extremely high quality, hardworking, kind, like soft spoken, but like excellent folks. So the collection of people that have sort of assembled around ResearchHub are like the best people that I've ever met in my life. So yeah, there's something I think really powerful around like letting your weird flag fly and putting out the bat signal around a certain problem, and it sort of acts as like this coalescing point for people who like truly care about the mission that you're working on. And yeah, it's just it's worked really well to attract awesome people who I do think truly care about fixing the problems in science as the number one priority. So yeah, big picture is like we've got a lot of work to do before like I'll actually feel proud in my heart. But beginnings of something pretty cool are happening.
Yeah. You're too modest, Patrick. I mean, you've brought this together. That's a mammoth exercise. I know what you're saying about, what was it, revenue dead or revenue live or whatever, which is very important, but only so many people get to say they can bring it to this level, right? So and you're right, it takes a village. I think, whatever, also in our endeavors, like it's never just a one-man show. It never is. You need to inspire and bring together the right people who look at it in the right way. You're going to kiss a few frogs along the way. Some people it doesn't work out, but that's life. And you need to keep on going, right? You need to persevere. Much like these researchers that you represent and that you work for. They know how to plow on, right? If anything, they know how to plow on, and for a lot less funding and money than what you've managed to get together for ResearchHub. So you have a lot to be proud of. Yeah.
Thank you for saying that, Aldo. It means a lot. Yeah.
And then the last question, it's always about reading. I don't know why. And before we hit record, Jeff, I don't know if you mind me disclosing that, but you said, I haven't been able to finish a book for such a long time. Nevertheless, I want to ask, like, what reading has inspired you on your journey? It could be anything. It can be a book, can be a magazine, platform. Is there any kind of type of reading that you would recommend to others? Maybe people who are listening in who say, hey, I want to get into this. I would love to help out. Is there anything that got you going? And this can be a personal one as well, Patrick. Like, I loved the book Power of One by Bryce Courtenay, which has nothing to do with genomes. But it's just, it's like this, is this great, like, get at it, the world's on your feet book, which is just, hyper motivating for me. So what's yours? Do you have one?
Totally. So, my favorite author is Kurt Vonnegut. I think all of his books are brilliant. He just describes reality in like a narrative form, extremely delicately, extremely well written. So, I love everything by Kurt Vonnegut. One book that I think is pretty cool. It's like I'm not going to get this right, but it's like Surfing in the Minefield or something like that. And it's the autobiography of Koury Mullet's, the person who came up with PCR. And so this guy, he's like a little bit of an out there dude, like a brilliant scientist, but also, loves life a lot. And so he has this famous story of taking acid and coming up with the idea for PCR. So I remember when I was an undergrad, he spoke at my institution. They recruited him. He had a little bit something extra in his system that day, apparently. So like a little bit of an out there dude who, when his mind is in the right space, can create something beautiful. And I think like, that's sort of what we want to do with ResearchHub, is help to empower everybody in the world, regardless of where they're coming from, to, think about science and share ideas in a way that society can progress on top of them.
Nice. Jeff, you any recommendations, takeaways, or people or any readings that have inspired you?
Oh man, I think the last book I actually read in its entirety was like Macbeth in high school or something like that.
Oh,
So yeah, so nothing like particularly impressive. I've not read the book itself, but I've definitely been getting sprinkles of like really high quality gold from No Rules, which is a book from Netflix about how to just kind of operate and what are good like business practices and processes and things like that to make things quite successful. And so I've been just kind of hearing nuggets from that coming in, and I think those really quite resonate, because one thing that I'm learning a lot of is coordinating a group of people is really quite hard. It's like a whole challenge in and of itself, and so being able to like have good like tried and proven ways and examples of how to do that, I think has been pretty eye-opening and inspiring. Another one that I just remembered that I read a little bit ago was 0 to 1. Which was a really good one, because I'm also discovering too, like, the stuff that like ResearchHub and like what Pat and team have like started to put together. It's like, it's really like a 0 to 1, example. Everyone in science talks about, everyone's like, the problems, we know the problems. Everyone's in consensus about the problems, but no one really built out the solution for it. And so I think what Pat and team have like started with ResearchHub is really like a 0 to 1 moment. And so that's not an easy thing to get to. I think 1 to 100 becomes a ton easier, but the 0 to 1 part is really quite hard. And I think you guys are doing the same thing, Aldo. So a couple books there.
Nice. All good recommendations. Guys, it's been a great pleasure talking to you. Patrick Joyce, COO and co-founder of ResearchHub, and Jeffrey Koury, president of the ResearchHub Foundation. I'm very sure we're going to hear loads and loads more about the great work that you do. It's been a great pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Aldo.
Thank you, Aldo.
Looking forward to hanging out in person next time.
Yes, let's do that. You've listened to Pulse by AlphaWire, produced by Natalie Piles and Amela Faisal, with great music, The Optimist, written by Holly Hamill, performed and produced by ALO. Episodes hosted weekly by me, Aldo de Pape.